that we've started to record. So I will do a bit of an introduction for a minute, and then we can get on, just to give people a bit of a moment. So I'll introduce myself. I am Sarah Bates. I am the executive lead of the Support After Suicide Partnership, and I'll go into what the Support After Suicide Partnership is in some more detail throughout this webinar. It's fairly informal. If at any point you have any questions, please just write them in the box. I can't hear you, so just pop them in the box and I will endeavour to answer them. And at the end there is some space to chat and to have a discussion about anything I've said. So we'll make sure that questions get answered at some point throughout. I don't think there's really much more to say before we get going, other than thank you for joining us. I did do a seminar similar to this last year, and we will cover some of the same material again, because for a lot of people it will be new, and it was last year, and I know how busy you all are. So if it sounds familiar, just sit back and feel smug. And if it doesn't, I hope that throughout this we manage to kind of share some knowledge and take forward how funeral directors support people bereaved by suicide, and vice versa, how we can support you. So to start, we have a partnership with SAFE. I work with Terry, and so 1 second. I have a good time. Sorry, I also have a house guest who's just left. So I work with Terry in a partnership. We've been working together since the back end of 2017. And one of the reasons for this is, as I'm sure you're aware, as funeral directors, you play such an important part in the early days of bereavement for people who are bereaved by suicide, or anything else for that matter, but for me it's suicide. And we really wanted to support funeral directors to make sure that you are able to do the best job that you can, and that you're not out there on your own doing a frontline service. And also to see how we can kind of work together with a lot of the changes I'm going to talk about today, where actually it'd be fantastic if together we could be proactive about what's happening and the changes that are happening within the NHS and the country. So without further ado, the outline today will just be a brief introduction as to what SASP does, who we are, what we're working on, supporting people bereaved by suicide, so what it's like for the families. I'm sure much of this will be familiar to you. Talking to people bereaved by suicide, and how you can help there. Some resources and things we hand out, and I've noticed that somebody's asked a question about, do we have any packs for support from us that we can send out to families? Yes, we absolutely do, and we can find a way to get that to you, either through you emailing me, or actually I believe at the end of the month you have a conference in Five Lakes in Essex, so it might be possible to get some packs there. So if you're attending that, you could possibly pick some up. I will talk to Terry and Angela about making that happen. But you can always come to Support After Suicide and ask us, and we'll get them sent out to you. And then we'll have a quick kind of questions and discussion, just because it's quite a lot of information, and I'm aware that nearly an hour's conference is quite long to hold on to a question. And then we'll move on to the key points of the NHS long-term plan, which was released in January. What does it mean for us, and basically what the plan is, as far as we know it. I should say this at the beginning, that it's very early days in terms of this plan, and it's very exciting, and we are working with the NHS to implement it, but actually at the moment we don't have a huge amount of information. However, I will tell you what I know, and we will also be doing another webinar in September where a lot of this work will have begun to develop. We'll have much more of an implementation framework, and we'll be keeping you up to date with that. We're also planning to write an article in the Insight magazine, so again we can disseminate information that way, make sure you're at the forefront of it. And then finally another questions and conclusions kind of chance. So the Support After Suicide Partnership, or SASP as we call it, because Support After Suicide Partnership is a long name, is made up of over 60 organisations from across the UK, all sorts of different organisations, and at the end we have a slide you can see who our members and supporters are. The difference between a member and a supporter is a member would be somebody who in some way delivers suicide bereavement support or frontline services, or facilitates in some way, whereas supporters are either individuals or possibly companies where their first interest is not suicide bereavement support. For example, Hanover Communications supporters with a lot of our comms work and our branding, but actually they're a communications company who just do work for us pro bono as part of their goodwill. So we work with all sorts of different people. Most of our members are individual organisations, non-profit organisations and charities. We also work with Public Health England, the NHS, occasionally Department of Health and Health Education England. Royal Colleges are somebody who are very supportive. People like yourselves and your organising bodies like SAFE and Co-op Funeral Care. We also work with frontline services, fire departments, transport police, people like that. And we do, research institutions, so we work with both the University of Manchester and the University of Worcestershire. And what we do is we research, advocate, consult and campaign to the vision that everyone bereaved or affected by suicide should be offered timely and appropriate support. I will go in more later on into what we would call timely and appropriate support. In terms of the research, I should mention this now because it's not the focus of my talk. Thank you to all of you who took part in the Impact of Suicide in the UK study. I know many of you did, and we really appreciate it. We were delighted to say that we have over 7,500 responses from all kinds of different people, professionals and people who've been personally affected and bereaved by suicide. And it was just an enormous, incredible, moving response. The University of Manchester research team, headed by Sharon MacDonald, are currently analysing the data. They're cleaning it because we collected an awful lot of information and it's taking a long time to clean and to put into sort of sensible report that we can start to talk about and use it as, you know, part of the compelling case for what happens in the UK and why you all need support and we need support. So we're expecting that to be published at the end of September, and I will of course talk more about that in September once we have sort of more results. But if you'd like any more information on that, just email me at sarah@supportaftersuicide.org.uk and I will just type that into this now. If you want to email me about anything, that's fine. You can also try info@supportaftersuicide.org.uk if it's a more general inquiry going forward. We also advocate, so we do a lot of speaking to government, we do a lot of speaking to people who are policy and change makers and saying this is a compelling case, this is why we need support, this is what's happening. And I think a direct result of that has been part of the NHS long-term plan, the inclusion of suicide bereavement support. As I said before, we're increasingly doing quite a lot of consultancy work and saying, you know, well, this is what's going on in the UK. And this is how we think change should be made, based on evidence, based on what happens already, based on good practice. And finally, we do campaigning because we believe that you should not have to go through suicide bereavement alone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the reality of being bereaved by suicide, and I'm sure that some of this will be very, very familiar to you in your daily lives. If I can change the slide. Okay. So up to 135 people are impacted by each suicide. This is a recent piece of work that's come from America, from Julie Sorrell. It was originally thought that between maybe 6 and 60 people. We don't think that's as accurate anymore. Not everybody of that 135 is so profoundly affected. Obviously, the family, the relationship you had to that person, the proximity of that person is very important in how you feel. Actually, far more important than things like bloodlines. So, you know, if you've got somebody who's particularly close to maybe a member of staff at a school or a psychiatrist, possibly very close to, you know, someone in their community or their family, they are likely to be the ones that are most profoundly impacted. But it is wide-reaching, and the suicide really does affect an entire community of people. By impacted, we mean the people who are really bereaved, the people whose lives are absolutely turned upside down. Somebody once described it to me as feeling like the aftermath of an atomic bomb, and I'd say that's pretty accurate. I know you'll have seen this as funeral directors when families come in. Some statistics around that are people bereaved by suicide are at 65% higher risk of making an attempt themselves. And about 9% of those people do go on to try and take their own lives. So 9% of people bereaved by suicide make a suicide attempt. When you're bereaved, you may, I say may, you will encounter extreme emotional trauma. a lot of uncertainty. You may also find that you have a sudden loss of income. You might be homeless. You might have a breakdown of a relationship, be that your spouse or others within your family. Revelations. So suicide is rather unique in this way, in that in most deaths you don't then have an inquest. So in suicide, as you know, you do, and it means that often people find out a lot of stuff about the person that's died they might not have done. And that can be really upsetting, to know that the person had a secret life, or a life that the parents weren't aware of, or the family weren't aware of. Obviously they have to arrange a funeral. There's often changes in care, especially with children. So if you have a parent who's a single parent and they take their own life, you might then suddenly find that the children are in foster care. We know that people who are bereaved have more mental health and physical health problems, and are 33% more likely to end up in A&E or hospital with a physical problem. They have to deal with the police, the coroner, an inquest, financial difficulties. And on top of all of this, they feel isolated and stigmatised. So on top of having to deal with everything that's happened, it really is true. People who they thought were friends would cross the street. People say all sorts of things to the family, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes not. It can be really difficult to deal with. There's also, on top of this, a huge question of why. Why did that person take their life? What could I have done to stop it? Could I have stopped it? Have I done something wrong? How did I miss it? We know that 2/3 of people who take their lives were not in touch with mental health services in the year before their death. And therefore, it can sometimes come as a massive shock to the family and to their friends, and just seems senseless. A lady who I work with, she's called Shirley Smith. She runs a few care share in Durham in the north. Fantastic service, fantastic woman. Described it as grief with the volume turned up, because it's different from other griefs. It's what we call complex grief. As I said, there are also many practical issues. And of course, the media can be involved, which can cause huge problems. There's the shock and the trauma. And people may also react in different ways, and different ways within one family. So people may be angry, confused, they may feel abandoned, they might, as they feel very guilty or anxious. Depending on what's happened, they may feel very ashamed. That might have sometimes a cultural, religious connotation, sometimes not. Very isolated, or they might feel nothing. And that's actually something we get quite a lot, is people email us and they say, I felt absolutely nothing. Does that mean there's something wrong with me? And no, it doesn't. It's a perfectly normal response. It's your body protecting itself. All of these reactions, as you know, are incredibly upsetting. So I'm sure I'm telling you something you already know here, but I think it's important to highlight it. Why are funeral directors important? Well, you are in the unique position that anybody that visits, anybody that's been bereaved by suicide or any other death visits a funeral director. Puts you in a very interesting position. You are often a point of contact for the people at the centre of the bereavement, because they're often the people who organise the funeral. And you are often, as I'm sure you've come across, the first professionals who have extended contact with the family. When someone's possibly taken their own life, there's different paths, but assuming that the person didn't die in their own home, the police will come around, CID unit usually, family liaison officer might be there, and they will talk to the family and tell them what's happened. That conversation rarely goes on for longer than a few minutes. It's rarely rarely more than half an hour, and they then leave. And depending on where they are in the country, that family may not have been offered any support at all. They're then sort of left on their own, really, to deal with it. They may come across people in the community, people they have to tell, but none of these people, these professionals, have any more time than a job to do. So funeral directors are often the first place that the family come in the door, and they offload absolutely everything. And I think that's one of the reasons we find it so important to support you and to talk to you and to try and see if we can sort of work both ways to make this as sort of supportive as we can for you and also for the family. Just going to pause because someone's typing. Can anyone else? Not here. And the slides will be made available. I'm just going to pause because several people are typing. I just want to check what they're going to say. Okay. Is this any better? I think some people are having some issues hearing. It is also going to be, it's recorded and it will also be available online, so I don't know if that recording might be a bit better. Okay, I will try and make sure that the key points I repeat for those of you who are finding it difficult to hear. My computer has inbuilt speakers, so there's not too much I can do about it, but I will see what I can do. Okay. I'll make it better way. Is that any better for people? Okay, I'm going to carry on. So, as I'm sure you know, funerals of someone who died by suicide can be very challenging. Death is often sudden, so there's very little, preparation being done, and it's often the person in the family they don't expect to possibly need a funeral, and that can be really difficult. The family may also be in shock and denial about the death. So I think one of the big misconceptions from our side with suicide prevention is that it's a lovely family of, sort of the nuclear family, and somebody tragically dies by suicide, and the family come in and they're all accepting, they're all very, kind of reacting in a way that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, can you all see me again? Hi, great, sorry. Oh, and now Siri's trying to offer me advice, just bear with. Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there, it just suddenly cut out. Were you following happily until that point? I say happily. Okay, great. So if that happens again, I will just try and connect. I'm afraid I don't know what the poor connection problem is. We seem to have full Wi-Fi here, so I'm not sure, and I'm the only one using the network, so I'm not entirely sure what's happening, but let's battle them. So, yes, talking about arranging the funeral after a suicide. So I think something that we come across a lot, and I'm sure you have too, is that often a situation is complicated and somebody takes their life. It's just complicated. It's, families have relationships within each other. There are already possible kind of sticking points and challenges there. And yes, the webinar will be recorded somewhere, and I will get Angela Camp to send you the details. The death is often sudden, and it may be of a supporter, somebody who really held that family together. And the grief needs may also be very complex. As I mentioned, sometimes there's just an out-and-out denial. And sometimes it's just really difficult in terms of the family have no idea. They may have been told some very upsetting information at the beginning. For example, I've had people come to me and say, actually recently we had an older gentleman whose wife took her life, and he thought that the inquest was going to be a trial for him not being able to keep her alive, and that there was a potential he'd go to prison, and he was very, very upset about it. And things like that, people just not having any real idea of why or how it differs around suicide. So if I can just move this along. Some common questions you may be asked. Can we still have a religious service and bury them in a graveyard? I've heard this several times. I've very sadly come across cases of people, sometimes priests, saying, actually, because it's suicide, I'm not comfortable doing the service. That is not something that should be listened to. And it's no different. Suicide doesn't block people in churches in Britain. Obviously, you have a lot of other religions and cultures who may find that that's not acceptable, and I'm actually not going to get into that today because it's a completely different conversation. Can we still have a traditional funeral? Again, along those lines, you may well be asked that. There's nothing in our laws stopping that from happening. Does there have to be a public announcement, and can we still see the body? So in some cases, this is appropriate, in some cases it isn't, and that's something that it's worth talking to the coroner about, which I know can be a challenge or very helpful depending on who your coroner is. So what do you do? Well, patience is key. Remembering the situation around the suicide is often complex. Sometimes it's difficult to forget. Or that there may be a long history, or there may seemingly be no context at all. It's always really important to normalise the situation. So treating funeral arrangements as if it was any other funeral, not tiptoeing around it, allowing that situation to be normal as much as possible. Allowing the family to talk where appropriate. As I said, and I'm sure many of you have come across this, families may come in and they may start to talk, and then it may continue and continue and continue, and suddenly you're the person that's getting everything in one massive emotional cloud. But actually talking and being able to do that is so important for them. And consider, as some of you have mentioned already, having a package of information and support, and that's something we can definitely help you with. And in the next slide, I'll talk about some of that information and support that's available. So, support in the UK. This is as it stands currently. We have two resources, which I know by now many of you have seen. One is Helpers at Hand, and several of you have just typed to say it was great, so thank you very much. Helpers at Hand is written by people bereaved by suicide, for people bereaved by suicide, and it goes over everything that may happen. So it's very sensitively written, and it deals with the emotional impact, the practical impact, and practical can be everything from who you might have to tell to what might happen next, to talking to your children, to talking to other adults, maybe things to say if you're being asked awkward questions or you're ready to talk about it yet, to talking to people who may find it very difficult to take on that information. It also goes and explains where you can get support with all sorts of different things, from coroners, inquests, emotional support, other practical support, registering the death, everything like that. You can access Helpers at Hand digitally through our website. It's just supportaftersuicide.org.uk/help-is-at-hand, and you should be able to download a copy there. Or if you email me, then we can send out copies, and we can send a box if that's helpful. I think it's 42 copies in a box. We can just get this sent out. It's published by Public Health England. It was written by Public Health England, the National Suicide Prevention Alliance, and us, the SASP, and it's free. So you can just request copies of that. We also have a smaller version that's like this big. It's called a Z card, and it's like one of those credit card things that opens up, and it has a condensed version and then signposts to helpers at hand. And they can be quite useful for kind of just slipping in other packs, because the helpers at hand itself is A5. Slightly bigger than A5. We also have Finding the Words. Finding the Words is a new publication. It came out last spring. And Finding the Words is all about talking to people who may have been bereaved by suicide. So it's like a shorter, handy guide for you or a friend or someone like that. And we often give this out when we give out helpers at hand. Again, it's really engaging. It has a lot of kind of things you can say and things you maybe shouldn't say, and what to kind of approach and how to do it and things like that, and some myth-busting things. And people have found that really helpful indeed. I can send copies of that as well. We have a limited print run of that one. So if you would like copies, please ask me. We have a maximum at the moment of 10 copies per person, just because we need to work with PHE to get that funded. At the moment it's being privately funded, but we are working on it. It's a really important resource and we fully intend to keep it going. The third thing that could be helpful is, as some of you have just put on the comments, is our website, supportaftersuicide.org.uk, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And also, as you can see from this map here, this is all the support, or not all the support, sorry, this is the vast majority of support in the UK. There are lots of, I'm sure many of you work with SOBS groups, cruise groups. There are peer-to-peer support. There are also some excellent services. There are some that are very proactive. So if you are located in Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Suffolk, Merseyside and Cheshire, or did I say Durham? Maybe I did say Durham already. Then you should know of some of the services in your area, and they're proactive bereavement support services. They're great. And we are very much looking forward to having some more in the next year or so, which I will talk about under the NHS 10-year plan. So to just go back about our website, no, June, you're absolutely right, there are not many in Scotland. This is something we are currently working with NHS Scotland on to refresh. The other thing I should note is for Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland at the moment, there are no hard copies of their versions of Helpers at Hand. And again, it's something that we're working with the NHS on and the public health services on. There is specific support for Helpers at Hand for Jersey and Guernsey. So if you live there, then you can get one that's specialised to Jersey and Guernsey, because the laws are different. But it is very much a work in progress. And yes, thank you for pointing out, also Mind have support groups, not countrywide, but in many, many areas of the country. That can all be found on our website, which is here. This is what it looks like. We have lots of information. Lots of it is about Helpers at Hand. You can download any of those support guides. There's also an option to, you type in this sort of top bar here, then it is an option to type in a postcode and you can see what the nearest support is. Sometimes that's a fantastic resource. Sometimes, I'm sorry, it's quite depressing because you type it in and there's just no support anywhere near you. If that's the case, you are always welcome to email us and we'll see what we can do and see who we can put you in touch with. You also have emotional practical support on that, and we're currently developing a new part of the website that's going to be a community hub called Your Stories. And it's got stories and interviews and videos from people who both work in bereavement and suicide bereavement, and people who've been bereaved by suicide. And the kind of the tagline to that is "You are not alone." And the idea is it's a place that people can go. So these are all some SASP resources that are good. And there's also a great directory called At a Loss, which have a really good database and a very fast-growing database of bereavement care services. So ataloss.org is worth looking at too. And they are signposted to somewhere on our website. I can send you a link. There's a PDF on our website of all the national services and how they are signposted. So people like Inquest, Coroner's Court Support Service, Cruise National Helpline, and things like that. So the NHS and the long-term plan. I'm going to talk about this for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then I would like, that's right, 20 minutes, and then we're going to do the last 10 minutes of any questions anyone has or anything anyone wants to ask in general. So the NHS released their 10-year plan on the 7th of January 2019. As I'm sure you're aware, the NHS long-term plan is a massive document of all the things they want to do. But really importantly, there were 2 points on page 70 and page 72, which changed what we're doing with suicide bereavement. The first was they have promised post-crisis support for families and staff who are bereaved by suicide through the NHS 111 helpline system. At the moment, that's pretty much all the information I can give you on that, because I think they're still implementing the framework for how that's going to look. The second point was that suicide bereavement support for bereaved families and staff working in mental health crisis services will be put in every area of the country. So in short, the NHS have pledged that suicide bereavement support for families and obviously staff working in the NHS will have services in every area of the country. So all 44 STPs of the country, they plan to have a proactive suicide bereavement support service. And we've been working with the NHS on this. And this is where we come down to what we deals within the first. Hello again. Yeah, thank you. Bye. Hi. I'm so sorry. The only thing I can think of is I'm aware all around the country. I'm based in East London, and the weather here is absolutely atrocious. And I've no idea if that's in any way affecting the internet, but I think it might be. So we'll battle on, and hopefully it won't cut out again. Key points. The NHS intend to implement suicide bereavement support for bereaved families in every area of the country. What SASP deems as appropriate and timely support is support that's proactive. It should be multi-agency. It should take the family from the beginning of their journey through to at least the end of the inquest and beyond if possible. It should be sustainable, it should be long-term, and it should be based locally in the community with national backup. So what would that look like? Well, for those of you that are lucky enough to have areas where you can already have this service, you'll know, but for those of you that don't, what we would like to see is a system where there's a real-time referral information pathway. So the police, for example, would talk to a family and at the same time get permission from that family to alert a bereavement liaison person who wouldn't sit within the police, they'd sit independently. And this person, with permission of the family, would then contact them within 72 hours of death, and they would say, we'd like to meet you within a week, and is that something you'd like to do? And they will then go around and do what we call an assessment of need, which is basically asking the family, what's the situation, who are you all, how can we help, what can we do? And they then go on to provide emotional and practical support over the coming weeks, but with the help of people in the community. So they may well link in with a local funeral director who they know will support that family. They may give them a choice of places to go, but say, well, actually, these funeral directors are, for example, signed up to be supportive. They have resources, they can help out and things like that. They may link them in with local counselling and bereavement services if there's a cruise in the area or counselling in the area. They may well go with the family to view the body if that's what the family wants. They may go with the family to speak to the coroner. They might be a liaison within that. They might put them in touch with Coroner's Court Support Service or Inquest if they needed some kind of legal support. And the idea is that the family no longer have to do this from scratch each time. They're in the system, and it makes it easier for them to be supported along this journey. so many people get involved when someone's bereaved by suicide. We have such an opportunity here to make that person supported at every single stage, to make their complex and profound grief at least somewhat easier practically. And to do this, the SASP is developing something that we're going to call a central hub, which I'm going to show you if I can. So, before the NHS released their long-term plan, the SASP recognised that we have increasingly services across the UK which are doing a great job. And often one of the issues is that there is either a lack of resources, there's a lack of coordination, sometimes there's not really, a local authority might want a service but they don't really know what to do. So we did a piece of scoping work around what could be helpful. We called it the Central Hub because that's what it would look like. And we engaged a wonderful group called Meadows Communications. Amy Meadows actually helped write Help Is at Hand, so she's part of the kind of professional group as such. And this is what we found. So this is what the SASP will be putting together in the next few months and then the coming years. We would like to put together a central hub that exists to provide quality evidence, best practice guidance and professional support for all those involved in planning and delivering suicide bereavement and liaison services. So basically a pack of how to run a good service, who needs to be involved and support around making that happen. And that can be anything from, so we're aware at the moment that one of the issues locally is that support groups often have really long waiting lists and that this can be really upsetting for the family and mean that there's no initial support. So what do we do about that? How do we resource that? How do we get around that? We're aware that often it's a bit hit and miss with other local professional services, how engaged and helpful they can be. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes you come across people who you may want to call difficult. Sometimes you are left with no support or areas with no money and no funding. And how do we get around that? So people are just speaking here about Safe Care, which is a bereavement service offering helpline, and how some funeral homes are running bereavement support groups, which is amazing to hear. I'd love to hear more about that. So, it was agreed that the following audiences should be the hub's hub's primary audience at the outset. So we will be looking initially at helping commissioners, CCGs, public health, people setting up new services, especially those who are in the early stages of development. And that also first responders have the opportunity for early contact. I have included funeral directors and first responders, and I don't know if that's controversial or not, but I just feel that given that you're often the first people with the opportunity to speak to a family or the family feels comfortable speaking to, I think that should be included and that you should be supported. Sorry, I'm also trying to read the comments at the same time, and it turns out it's quite difficult to multitask. So just to answer some questions, do you have resources to help set up a support group? Yes, we do. So there are currently guidelines from Public Health England. And actually, one of the other pieces of work that I haven't talked about today is the Support After Suicide is working with the National Bereavement Alliance to come up with a helpful guide to setting up a peer-to-peer support group. And it's not just for suicide. We decided, having brought together a reference group from different fields of bereavement, that actually it was a wider issue than suicide. So although we are supporting the work and very involved in the work, it will be bereavement-wide. And I can share that with you. We're hoping to have that published by the middle of May. It will be available digitally, it will be free, and it will take you through everything from finding a safe space to legal considerations to how to run and facilitate a support group, things you might come across, helpful resources and stuff like that. So very, very happy to share that with you. Going back to this, what does it mean? What does the Central Hub mean? What does the long-term plan mean? In short, it means that there'll be a more coordinated system of suicide bereavement support, both locally and nationally. We have no intention of making Central Hub prescriptive. people can go off and do what they like. But what we do want to do is provide a central place for people where they feel that it's helpful, that they can come back time and time again, that they can get support, that they know the service they are producing is to a quality guideline, to a quality standard, and that it's evaluated. It can be evaluated, and we very much push self-evaluation. We think this is great as long as it's done properly and with the right mindset, and that's what the Central Hub would like to provide, and that's what we're aiming to do. We're looking at better local and national support services. So working with local businesses and organisations, and this is something I've talked about before. We've seen some great initiatives across the country. Sometimes it involves police. So, for example, in Leicestershire, they had issues with people standing on motorway bridges when they were suicidal. And so they set the neighbourhood watch around, and the police went to the neighbourhood watch and they said this is a massive issue. And so all the houses along the embankments were asked to look out and to call a certain line. And it's really reduced the risk of people taking their life on those bridges. We've had funeral directors who have been had a good relationship with the local crash, and so if you've got, say, a family with young children and they've been bereaved by anything, they can take their children and get some very heavily discounted or free childcare for a few hours to allow them to go and help arrange the funeral. I know that many of you have fantastic services, peer-to-peer support groups, help with different things. In Durham, they believe in a very holistic approach, and they have sessions for people to come in and do sort of art and music and expressing how they feel, and also for some people just going and getting a massage, which may seem kind of frivolous, but actually when everything else seems like total hell, that hour in calm can really, really make a difference. So we want to provide proactive support for families, and I think this is so important, and where us working with SAFE is really important. Working with you individually is so important, because if we can link you in with the suicide liaison officers, with the local services, it makes your job easier, and it means that people get better support, because it's a system, it's a pathway that works, and it also allows you to feedback issues and say, for example, someone just said, I've just noticed a comment, someone said the problem is my local cruise group has a really long waiting list. Well, okay, great. If we know that happens, then we can see what we can do about it. Also, the ability to signpost is always helpful, and sharing resources. So, when will all this happen? Well, we're currently working with NHSE on implementing the long-term plan. So I don't have a set deadline for that yet, but I can say you'll start to see differences by the end of the year. Phase 1 of the Central Hub, including a website, we hope to have up by the end of the summer in 2019, so that will happen quite quickly. And that initial Central Hub will take people through how to sort of resourcing, how to set up liaison services, how to get in touch with people. Obviously, it's aimed mainly at commissioners and things like that, but the reason we're telling you is because you will be key to this. And so if we can work together and it sort of integrate it in a way that's helpful, then I think everybody has a better chance of making this a success. And then phases 2 and 3 will be by the end of 2020. Yeah, sorry, someone's just commented that most local cruise groups have really long time waiting lists. Yes, they do, and it may mean that we need more resourcing, or that more support groups in terms of, maybe part of the liaison role is to run support groups after the inquest and things like that, as happens in Cornwall. It's a real issue, and sadly. What you can do to help: if you think it would be helpful to you, please order copies of Help is at Hand and Finding the Words for your branch. And if you already know of local services and you haven't already introduced yourself to them, well, it sounds like many of you have, please do. And once we have liaison roles in certain areas, we would like to help with your support to facilitate meeting those people and getting involved, and having involvement with the local suicide prevention group if you aren't already. So I put this third bullet point in: work with your local coroner where possible. And I think this might be slightly controversial, because I think many of you probably do. And I have heard many mixed reports. We work with the Chief Coroner's Office, and we don't work particularly with local coroners, but we've had all sorts of good and bad. So I'm going to just leave that right there and not get involved. But where possible, please work with your local coroner. And signpost the local support them to us if you think it's helpful, or at a loss if you think they're helpful. SASP is very much all-inclusive and not a competition. So if you think there's a better resource than us, then please signpost to them. That's absolutely fine with us. But if you do know of anywhere, then yeah, please continue to do the great work that you're doing. Somebody asked me some questions. So where can you get the Find the Word books? Email me at sarah@supportaftersuicide.org.uk or or ask Angela and she can forward it on and I can send you some. As I say, because of the limited resourcing of them at the moment, I can't send you more than about 10 copies at a time. But as soon as we get that up and running again, then I can continue to supply them. We do have enough for 10 copies for each person. Our vision for this is that around 6,000 families a year are devastated by suicide. And we have so many people tell us that there's no local support, and that often it's services like funeral directors that are providing support because no one else is. We would really love to be able to tell each family that someone is there for them, that the community can support them, and that they don't have to do this alone. I think that's a really big hill to climb, but I think we're in the right direction. I've been doing this job since 2016. I say job, it's more of a life choice for me. I've been doing this since 2016 and I have not seen change like this ever before. The field is changing, the attitudes are changing, the people at the top are changing, and I think it's enormously exciting. And we are determined to make sure that this happens, that it happens correctly, and to work with people like NHS Mental Health and Public Health England, right down to local support services, to make sure that we can provide a journey that helps people and makes suicide bereavement something that they don't have to go through alone. So, on that comment, does anybody have any questions or discussion, anything I've raised or not raised that they'd like to chat about for the last 10 minutes? And that's just a list of our members and supporters. Oh, it's lovely to see that in Norfolk the coroners are very helpful with Norfolk suicide prevention plan. That's great. I mean, in some areas the coroners are absolutely fantastic. I recently dealt with some coroners in South Wales and they were just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The coroner's officer especially went above and beyond to make sure the family got support and got the information they needed in quite a complex situation. Does anybody have any questions at all about anything I've said or anything they want to discuss? Okay. Yes, please feel free to email me. I'll write my email again. No, so at the moment, so the customers do hand out the Happers at Hand booklet over the whole country where families have been bereaved by suicide. No, absolutely not. In some areas they do. So if you're living, for example, in Leicestershire, Thames Valley area, Durham, Cornwall, they do, I believe. Possibly in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as well, I'm not sure about that. But often, no, they don't. In some areas, we have police officers who will refer the family to us, and then we end up giving them Helpers at Hand. In some areas, there is no support. We have a challenge with the police in that they are simply so busy. They often don't know that they're attending a suicide until after they've left the station, so they don't have it on them. They, by the time the case is done and they go back, they don't remember to take it with them. So it is something we're working on with them, but it's one of the reasons as well that funeral directors are so key, because the family come to you and you don't go out to the family in the first instance often. So it sort of allows for that to happen quite quickly. More questions? Okay. Yes, I agree. The police should have, as it's the first contact. It's just one of the issues is just the practicality of police carrying something like this when the majority of what they go to is not suicide. they'd sort of, potentially carry it around for a year and never use it. So there are areas that do it, and there are areas that are quite good for it, and it's something that we're working on with different police forces, but it's still very much developing. The other thing we're working on is real-time surveillance and real-time referral with police officers. It's two different things. Real-time surveillance, we say in terms of national data, which would feed back up to a central system. And real-time referral would be the local pathway that allows that person to get proactive support when they've been bereaved. So we're working on it. How do we get, so if you have a support group or you have information that you would like added to a database, please just email me, and it's a form that we ask you to fill in, and it sort of talks about what you're doing and when it is and how many people can attend and if it's open or closed and stuff like that and what to expect. And if you have any specialities, so for example, focus on elderly or children or anything. And then we send it to our lovely web person, Alvina, and she will put it on. We have very few kind of guidelines around what will go on the map of support, but we do say it has to be a suitable support group for people, so it has to be a safe place, and it has to be free at the point of access. So we won't, for example, signpost to counselling that charges at the point of access or anything like that, and I know that many of you don't, but just so that you're aware of that. And I'm just going to go back up and look at all the questions. Great. Well, I'm so sorry for the issues around technology, and I really hope it hasn't ruined it for anyone. If you did miss anything or you do want to ask any questions, then just email me and I will do what I can. And I believe that both the recording and the slides will be made available through Angela or Claire Day, probably. Okay. Just going to wait. So I'm not going to say any new information. So if you'd like to leave, please go for it. Otherwise, I'm just going to wait for people to type and answer their questions. And thank you very much for listening. Good. Okay. In which case, that's me out, if that's everyone. Thank you very much.